Howdy everyone! Today we're going to continue with the basics of philosophy, and today's subject is going to be epistemology. A very common theme in philosophy overall would be what I would call the transcendental activity. It's very common that philosophy analyzes a certain subject and then even moves beyond the subject itself. Take metaphysics, for instance, that we discussed in the last episode. Meta actually means beyond or after, so it is beyond physics itself. And the same thing goes with the subject of epistemology. If science is trying to figure out knowledge about certain things, then philosophy and epistemology is trying to figure out what can we even call knowledge? What criterions do we have to have in order for us to call it knowledge? So epistemology is moving beyond the subject of science itself. So now, let's go through a typical definition of what we can call knowledge.
So once again we have to go back to Plato, for he had a very early theory of knowledge. For him, something can be considered knowledge if and only if it's a justified, true belief. Let's unpack these conditions, shall we?
Let's begin with the criterion of truth. Something is true if it's in accordance with reality. Simple as that. Take the statement, for example, the cat is on the mat. That statement is true if and only if the cat is really on the mat. But as we discussed in the last episode, one cannot only focus on the subject of epistemology, because the criterion of truth is more of an ontological question.
It might be a holographic cat. Then the statement is not true anymore. Then you have the criterion of belief. Something cannot be considered knowledge solely based upon truth. One must also believe that it is true. Why this condition is so important is because you cannot know something if you don't also believe that it is true. For instance, if I would see a ghost, you could say that it was true that I saw a ghost, but I don't believe in ghosts. So therefore, I don't have the knowledge that ghosts exist. I myself must believe in the fact.
Then the last condition would be justification. Let's say, hypothetically, that I won the lottery and I said, oh, I bought a lottery ticket because I believed that I would win. I was correct in my belief, but you wouldn't call that knowledge, would you? So in fact, me winning the lottery was a true belief, but it was merely a lucky guess. That's why the condition of justification is so important. So at least according to Plato, knowledge is a justified true belief. It is true that here is a tree. It's in accordance with reality. I believe myself that it is there, and I can justify it being there. I can sense it, I can feel it, and I can see it. Another big part about epistemology is the philosophy of science. Because now, when we have a firm definition of what we can call knowledge, we can extrapolate the concept and see if we can figure out what would be considered good or bad science.
In the beginning of the 20th century, The Vienna Circle was especially engaged with the question of what good science should be. Empowered by the philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein's book Tractatus Logicus Philosophicus, they had a strictly anti-metaphysical stance. They were only concerned with the empirical reality. A good scientist, according to the Vienna Circle, should not start with any hypothesis at all. He should simply go out into nature and record what he sees. For instance, he sees a swan and notices that it is white. Then he happens to see another swan, it also being white. After noticing a common element, he creates a hypothesis that all swans are white, and now he will try to verify the hypothesis. If he succeeds in finding only white swans, he asserts therefore that all swans must be white. This is also called inductive reasoning. So the criterion of what is good science is basically, it is good science if and only if it's verifiable. For instance, you can verify that a swan is white, but you cannot verify the existence of God. Therefore, religion cannot be considered science.
So according to the Vienna Circle, here we have a scientific knowledge that all swans are white. But there's a big problem with this definition of science. And the problem was noticed by the Austrian philosopher Karl Popper. And to him, this was already an outdated version of science, since the Scottish philosopher David Hume formulated his problem of induction.
Like I said before, induction works like this. I see one white swan, another white swan, one more white swan, another white swan. Therefore, all swans are white. But the problem with doing this, in this case, is that you only have 4 instances of verifications. And then from that knowledge, you assert that all swans are white. And all is an infinite amount. So what you are doing is asserting from a number of 4 to that of an infinite amount. 4 divided by infinity equals infinitely small. So the chance of you being correct in believing that all swans are white from the information that you have is infinitely small. And it wouldn't matter even if you would have 1,000,000 white swans, the probability that you are correct would still be infinitely small.
So the Vienna Circle's way of science didn't hold. But Karl Popper, of course, had his own theory in mind, namely falsificationalism. So Karl Popper's way of science is in many ways the opposite of what the Vienna Circle believed. The Vienna Circle thought that you should go out into nature without a hypothesis and just observe, and then make up a hypothesis out of those observations, and then try to verify the hypothesis. But Karl thought that you should begin with a hypothesis and then go out in the world and see if you can falsify your hypothesis.
So without knowing anything, the scientist should make the hypothesis, all swans are white, and then go out in the world to see if the hypothesis is wrong. And boom, they discovered that in matter of fact, there are black swans in Australia.
And during the time when a scientist has been unable to falsify a theory or hypothesis, that theory is called that it is corroborated. For instance, if no one would have found the black swan in Australia, like I said before, that theory that all swans are white is considered corroborated. It is unfalsified.
So the criterion of what should be considered good science is if and only if it is falsifiable. I can falsify the hypothesis that all swans are white, but there is no way for you to be able to falsify the existence of God, so therefore is religion separate from science.
Throughout the ages of philosophy, when philosophers have been trying to distinguish good science from bad science, there has always been these sneaky looking people looking at the other philosophers with dead eyes and laughing. The skeptics. The word skepsis actually means investigation. So in ancient Greece, the skeptics believed that there was such a thing as truth. They just didn't think it was achievable by us humans. So they saw it as their task to criticize other philosophers when they believed that they achieved the truth.
But in our modern day, skepticism has taken a much deeper analysis, questioning whether there is such a notion as truth at all, or even that there exists more than one truth.
A simple skeptical argument would be that, as we discussed in the last episode, we humans are confined to our 5 basic senses. And maybe the things in themselves doesn't exist at all. The only thing that exists is me receiving the sense data. So me is the only thing that exists, or I. This way of thinking is also called solipsism. There are many other skeptical theories that are not as gloomy as the one I just gave you, but to comfort you a little bit, I would say it is just as likely to be true that everything exists as it is that nothing exists but me. That's it for today, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. Next time, at first I thought that we were gonna do ethics, but before we do that, I think we need a basis of logic. So that's what we're gonna do next time. Until then, take care.